Hey everybody, I just wanted to let you know that this episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Kobold Press. Kobold Press are the makers of so many fine 5th edition game products like the Creature Codex, the Tome of Beasts, the Midgard campaign setting, and now the Empire of Ghouls, the first 5th edition campaign from Kobold Press for characters levels 1 to 14, taking your heroes deep into the realms of undead. Explore a kingdom of terror and blood ruled by vampires, and far below the earth in the Underdark, a mighty empire of ghouls. This massive 5e campaign will include new Underdark lore, as well as tons of undead monsters, magic, and more, with 2 books, count them 2, an adventure book and a player guide. The Kickstarter is live. It ends Friday, May 31st. And guess what? It's already funded and blowing through the stretch goals because it's 300%, baby. Find out more at koboldpress.com/kickstarters and join the Empire of Ghouls today. This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. On the show, I'm talking with Johnn, Four, and Darren Steele about Darren's campaign setting of Pindus, in which he has an actual play podcast and several game products. Here is my conversation with them. Okay, everybody, now I am here with 2 great game designers, legends, giants, dare I say, in the industry. Johnn, Four, welcome back to Tabletop Babble. For people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in tabletop role-playing games?
Well, thanks for letting me put my giant head into your podcast once again.
Absolutely.
I run the website roleplayingtips.com, which offers a way for game masters to have more fun at every game, with over 7,000 tips and GM advice for game masters.
Yes, and co-author on a little adventure called The Demon Plague with another hack, whoever that was, who helped you write that.
That would be you, my friend. You did the best writing in that.
Oh, no, it was a group effort for sure, among me and you, and then many, many other people who also worked on that thing. People should definitely check that out, roleplayingtips.com/Demon Plague. But we have another guest here in the E-Room with us, Darren. For people who don't know, who are you and what do you do in the world of tabletop role-playing games?
My name is Darren Steele. I'm a Canadian who's just crawling out of hibernation after a long, very cold winter in Edmonton, Alberta. And I play games, and I'm writing games, and I run a podcast, games as well. If I had to sum up sort of the hottest hits of what I've done so far, is I'm currently running an open table game at a youth shelter here in Edmonton.
Whoa, that's awesome.
Yeah, there's, at-risk youth of all kinds meet every second Monday to play this open table game that is noted so that multiple game masters can pick it up at the same time and run multiple tables, because sometimes we have 6 kids there and sometimes we have 15 kids there. So it's this really well documented open table West Marches style game that is intentional gaming, that is building social skills and abilities and confidence for youth who enjoy it and who hopefully benefit from it. Beyond that, I run a website. It's called Shadows of Pindus. The name comes from the duet podcast that I run, an actual play 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons podcast in an arcane punk mega city, a pretty different setting than your standard high fantasy Dungeons and Dragons, which is cool. And I'm writing some adventures in that world as well.
We have a ton to talk about. You work on so many things, and I want to ask you about all of them. I was not aware of the youth shelter open table game that you run, so let's start there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, this is one of the things that is, every 2 weeks I get to go, and it's just one of the single most satisfying things I've had the pleasure to do.
Nice. Yeah, it sounds great. And I love to hear people, giving back to the community, especially through role-playing games, which is a great, great thing. Talk to me a little bit about sort of how you got set up doing it and, how you got started running it, in case somebody out there is wondering, like, hey, can I do that?
Well, I've heard of people doing it in the community. Of course, I when Game to Grow, came into being, and I saw what Adam and Adam were doing in Seattle. I was very excited about that idea. I'm really inspired by people who are using it in education, and had been thinking really hard about whether or not I might start something of that kind. And as I was sitting around thinking about it, I heard on the radio a guy named Brian Solly, who's a local here to Edmonton, talking about his nonprofit that's already doing it. Level Up Gaming League is what they call themselves. And it was perfect because I reached out to them, I started volunteering for them, and I get to do all the fun parts of designing and running the games, and I don't have to know very much about fundraising and liability insurance, etc. So, the lesson learned that I really encourage people to pass on is if you're thinking about doing something like this, see if you can find people who are doing it already, because the people who are running the organization, they take a lot of responsibility. They're very cool. They're every bit as passionate about me as gaming, but they don't get to do very much of the gaming. And the genesis of this specific game was I got to go in and sit in on games that they were running at this one particular youth shelter for almost a year, helping people build characters and level up characters and interpreting the rules, sitting beside people, teaching them what a D8 is and what a D10 is, teaching them how not to throw dice off the table every time they roll them. And there was a problem that became apparent to me, and that problem was we had a wait list. We had a game master who was running, Mark Mellenberg was his name. It was a really cool desert campaign in his own homebrew world where the Pharaoh had called people from afar to solve a problem where Vecna has infected the catacombs beneath the city. And we had 7 players plus up to 3 volunteers who were coming in and out. And that was kind of all we could take. And there was another 10 people who were on a wait list. But it was that, I don't know if traditional is the right word, but a common dramatic version of Dungeons and Dragons where you build, backstory elements into the plot. And in that game, it's really hard to bring somebody new in out of the blue. So it's a bit exclusive. And the other problem was these are youth who are staying in a shelter. So scheduling stuff, them being able to reliably show up is hard to ask of them. So despite having, 10, 12 people on a wait list, there were days when we show up and we have 2 players who actually showed up. And we ran the games, we run a game even for 1 person, but it felt like there was a problem. And so over Christmas, I picked up the idea of running a West Marches game. Ben Robbins' West. Are you familiar with West Marches concept?
I am, but our listeners may not be. So go ahead and break it down.
Of course. The ideas, or at least as I've interpreted the ideas of West Marches, and Ben Robbins has if you just Google West Marches, you'll find what Ben Robbins has to say about it, and he'll go into way more detail than me. But the idea is that you have a pretty well detailed map. So you might think of it as a sandbox, but there's a few extra things that go into it to make it go from a sandbox game to a true West Marches game. And in that map, there is a safe place, a town, a fortress. And the safe place is also super boring. So play starts in that safe place, but there's nothing very much to do there. Shopping trips in West Marches style game aren't really a thing. And then out in the world, that's where all of your dungeons are. That's where all your exploration happens. There's a lot of exploration in the style of the game. And every time you come to the table, there's going to be a group of people from a larger community of players, say. So right now at the shelter, there's about 20 people who've made characters and have stepped into the game at one time or another. But they don't all show up for any given game. They show up and they decide what they want to do, what they want to explore. The promise that we make them is whichever direction you go, there will be something interesting to do, provided you don't sit around in boring town and talk to our boring NPCs all day. And they'll go out and encounter what they encounter. And there's a well detailed map that they never ever see, and random encounter tables that they never see, but they of course begin to learn what's in these areas. And you have the areas built up with different challenge ratings. So the farther they get from town, the more dangerous things become. And then the really important thing, the thing that changes it from a from a sandbox of the open table game where we can really create a community of players that are involved is we do all sorts of things to encourage ways that the players can share information with each other in between games. So we give experience points for journal writing. So, for example, one of our groups, one day they had a treasure map, and the treasure map was a sort of a rough sort of sketch of, take this road, take this game trail. There's a thing over there with a gargoyle guarding it, and there's some treasure. If you want the treasure, follow the map. And they did that, and on their way to the treasure, they encountered a 30-foot tall tree root that was blocking their way. And it took them forever to figure out how to climb over this thing as level 1 characters. And they did, and on they went, and they defeated a gargoyle, which they were supposed to answer a riddle to. And so it was a very hard battle, but they did, and they got their treasure. They go home. But the important part is that now that the game is over, they write a journal. Or they're given extra experience points if they journal about it. And so several of these people mentioned this huge root in their journal. And the journal goes into a public place, in our case, a cork board, although when I was playtesting it, it was an online forum. And other people who weren't there for that session, they get a chance to kind of catch hooks, the paths that weren't taken. And so at the very next session, a group of people were really fascinated with that route. And so they got together, they planned what they were going to do. They come and they tell us, and then they begin setting their own goals in an open sandbox world.
Nice. That's great. Setting your own goals, right? In an open sandbox where I know players who have been playing for 20 years and can't do that.
It's true. It's true. The people wanting to be fed. For these players, like I say, if they don't decide to go and do something and sit around at home, we just spend 3 hours in the session talking to each other.
Well, I mean, I could talk to you about this for the entire podcast. So please come back and let's do just that. Let's move on to Pindus. Talk to me a little bit about Pindus. Let's start with the podcast. You say it's a duet podcast, meaning one GM, one player, right?
That's right. Or in its current iteration, that's what we've recorded and released so far. There's a kind of a weird genesis for why it got off the ground that way. I was itching to do a actual play podcast for a long time. My work allows me to listen a lot. So I'll go through 8 hours of podcasting in a day, oftentimes. So I've been really inspired by all I've heard. I wanted to do it. And then a friend of mine approached me and pitched the idea. He wanted to do his master's thesis. And as a part of his research project, he wanted to explore archetype. He wanted to explore character. He wanted to explore narrative, and invited me to game master for him. And I thought to myself, oh, that sounds a lot of work. I'll do it if I can record it. And that's where it began. So the world of Pindus is its genesis is in a couple of different places. In my community, in the people who I've been introducing into D&D, fantasy tropes aren't very well known. And so I wanted to create a world where we could use some more of our sort of contemporary tropes. And so that it is this large city where there are arcane guilds, which you might read as like a cyberpunk mega corporation who are in charge or who are always seeking to compete with each other. You as an adventurer in this world, instead of being necessarily a hero, you might be more of a private security contractor who is seeking a way to, one of the only ways in this world, to rise themselves up from the lowest of society. And it's really, really high action. We really kind of lose this sense of, that race is evil and this race is good. It's a place that's full of refugees. And so, the goblins and the orcs and so forth are just there living. Players are asked to figure out who people are actually, rather than what culture do they represent. And it's, the word I keep using is intimate. It's a bit of a thinking person's setting, if you will.
I like that. And I love the idea of like, you have to get to know the person. You can't just say, well, there's a dwarf and we know that this dwarf will love talking about mining ore and drinking beer and that sort of thing. Knowing that any person can go deeper does make it feel closer, I think, to our real world, right? Especially with the rise of the internet and the world becoming a smaller place, right? You really can't judge any book by its cover anymore. And I think the same is true for many fantasy worlds.
That's absolutely true. I've read about, Gygax and Greyhawk in the 70s being a pretty thin veil for, for early's America. His ideas, it looked sort of faux European, but really at the core of it was that anybody who wanted to could, stick out a piece of land and build a keep. Anybody who wanted to could, go out and do a job and start a business and get super freaking rich off of it, which are really embedded in this American, project psyche, and also, as maybe we can associate with 70s Western culture entirely. I won't just pick on the Americans. There were people who were the bad guys, absolutely the bad guys. They weren't communists; they were hobgoblins. I don't know if those map exactly to each other, but we want to interrogate those assumptions a little closer now. And so, yeah, you better figure out what somebody thinks and what somebody cares about before you go attacking them, because they got long ears.
You're playing this one person, one GM game. Do you find that it is very intimate when you are playing with one person, one GM like that?
Intimacy is a really good word for it. It is absolutely trying to read what the person across the table cares about, to give them the hooks, to lay down track in front of where they're going, requires paying an awful lot of attention.
Yeah, it really does. I feel like I've played some one player, one GM games, and it is intense in a way that it's like this is a lot of us sharing, this story together and feeling things about this story, but also in the way of like, oh wow, I really need to have plot holes more buttoned up than I normally would, and that sort of thing, because the scrutiny for the story is higher. It seems like when the players are there, they get distracted with each other.
Like a box of kittens. The kittens never think outside the box when they're trapped with each other. They're constantly distracting each other.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I've written a little bit about it, but one of my observations about running a duet game is like players will average themselves out. One player's always got a really ridiculous idea, but there's always somebody else in the group to say, "Oh no, come on! Like let's be reasonable." And then if that player is the only other one you're talking about, there are no reins on their unreasonability.
It's just fascinating, these sort of one player, one GM or two player RPG games too that I see. There's a whole podcast dedicated to trying out different ones called Party of One. It's sort of the one shot to your campaign, if you will. And now you're also designing stuff in the world of Pindus, right?
I am, yeah. It's a world that has, I think it's really taken people's imagination. Uh, in part, I think because the best and worst thing about it is that there's only particular stories that you can tell there. There's a lot of stuff that I've said aren't in this world in order to really point up the things that are in this world. It's D&D for people who love cyberpunk. That's a really simple way to put it.
And what do you think makes it cyberpunky?
Yeah, I think what makes it cyberpunky is the disparity between the wealthy and the poor in it are huge. There's very little social mobility between people, and all the peoples are smashed together. One of the overriding themes of it is that there is an invader, an enemy at the gates of a kind. There is a jungle. If anybody understood why this jungle is so angry, everybody would probably be much safer. But basically, nature itself has risen up and is out to slaughter civilization. So that here in the civilized lands, which are very few now, there is no permitted plant matter. It seems like the ecology itself is is out against the peoples, the elves and the orcs and the goblins and all these anthropomorphized animal races and so forth who are smashed together. And everybody has been kind of forced into a retreat, into one bastion where they can live. It's called Pindus on Isles. It is in the midst of a vast freshwater lake. And it is, it's atop some ley lines. It's very easy to do powerful magics there. And so some of the arcane guilds who have wielded these magics have done things that have won them incredible influence. So one of the guilds are the people who figured out how to create artificial sustenance of a kind, a gel. And so you can't go around buying carrots. You can get meat if you're very wealthy, because meat can eat gel. But for the most part, people subsist on this awful sort of tasteless food in this, crushing 70-story tall city. There is another arcane guild that has developed the magical technology, if you will, to police and patrol and control imports and exports from the very few sort of agrarian lands that remain into this island. And so there is powerful magic that is leaning towards our modern day conveniences in the way of technology that influences the world every day. And all this power that is concentrated in the hands of these organizations is absolutely not for sharing. And so when you step into the setting, you are, a contractor of a kind, if you're an adventurer, and you may have moral desires. There's lots of room for good-hearted people in the setting, but you are kind of losing the battle. Civilization itself is consuming itself in the face of the invader that wants to consume it. But for those who do seek their community and hope to, bring light and peace, if they can manage even a little bit, their spark shines all the brighter.
Cool. Wow, that is awesome. And it's cool to have this whole sort of message of hope sort of woven throughout it, right? Grim Dark is, I think, something that you find a lot. John and I wrote The Demon Plague, which can get pretty grim dark at times.
Yeah, it is rough.
But it's also great to have those moments of hope in there, and to have this idea of hope, I think is really, really cool.
It's maybe the most important part about the setting is the fact that it's not Game of Thrones, is that everything is awful, and yet there are people that are good. When I was researching before I got into the podcast itself, so Joel's character, the lead character in the duet, his name is Croak, is a disadvantaged, drug-addicted youth in the setting who's really hunting for a way to find, first to survive day to day, but also to find community and meaning, because racism exists in the setting. I talked about how, for us, we cannot, as players, trust that racism is true in the setting. Individuals are individuals. However, characters within the setting are, characters, and some of them are total So his character is presents in a way that is marginalized. And I wanted to bring some reality to it. I did a lot of research before we embarked on it. And the thing that I kept finding over and over and over again that conflicted with my preconceptions is that when you start looking into, homeless populations, disadvantaged people, they're not walking around feeling sorry for themselves as a whole. I found this great documentary that was set in Vancouver, where the homeless population, a lot of them spoke as if they had chose this. This is a life of freedom. Like, they don't want to be stuck in a job where somebody can tell them what to do. And these particular group of people had created an extreme sport. They take these shopping carts up to the tops of the hills there, and they will go down lazily back and forth across the streets, collecting bottles, and turning them in. And then they'll go back up to the top of the hill, take a cart from the Safeway at the top of it, and they'll race down them. They'll take concrete blocks, or they'll put each other in the baskets of these, and they'll find the steepest roads, and they will race. And they sit on the back of these carts, and they drag one foot on the ground as a sort of rudder to steer this way and that way and weave through traffic. And you can imagine how loud it is when you just take in your shopping cart, with those little wheels, the noise they make in a parking lot, ripping down these mountains at full speed and just full of joy. And so Pindus has to have that. It has to have the people, whoever their circumstances, have found the things that they absolutely love and the things that they'll fight to keep, the community that they'll fight to build.
Hey everybody, just wanted to take a quick break to let you know that I love D&D Beyond. Thank you so much for sponsoring this episode of Tabletop Babble. D&D Beyond is really great if you are a game designer. I have it open all the time, multiple tabs, and I am usually searching for all kinds of different stuff when I am writing my D&D stuff during the day. It makes it so easy to look everything up. I use it when I'm DMing, I use it when I am writing, and I use it as a player too. I can't stress enough how easy the character builder is. You can line up all your options, you can make things custom. You can say, we're not using these rules at my table. We're using these rules. I want Eberron stuff. I don't want Eberron stuff. I want playtest stuff. I don't want playtest stuff. All of that is super awesome. It's user-friendly, and they're constantly making awesome updates to this thing. This is a living engine of cool. So go check it out at dndbeyond.com. All right, back to the show.
You mentioned that players average themselves out, which was, I think, a fantastic insight. When you're GMing a non-single player game, how do you compensate for that effect?
So there's a couple of things. I subscribe to the Miss Frizzle's school of playing role-playing games. That is, I'm going to misquote it. Make mistakes, get messy, try something. And I preface this for players. I instruct them, if you will. My game master's instructions to the players are, make interesting choices and take risks. Because if all you want to achieve in this game is to go shopping over and over again, that's a really easy thing to get in our life. I think the other thing that I might do to encourage people to try the wild things is I reward risk if I can. I mean, first of all, just through pure enthusiasm, when people are wanting to try something big. In the youth shelter game, risk taking is baked into the way the system works. Inspiration isn't for people who make me laugh. It's not necessarily for role playing. Inspiration is for the people who do something big, who put themselves on the edge. And the last thing that I do regularly is I really like ticking clocks. I will quite often, when I sit down in a session, just say, we're going to play until 11 o'clock tonight. And that's how long you have to get through this content. I had the most incredible experience at Introcaso. This is one of our local RPG conventions, with Daniel Hodges, who's a clever guy. He's actually my co-writer on this adventure that I've just released. And he ran us through Against the Slave Lords, which is an old module. We were playing basic D&D. And in that module, he told us, this is going to take place in real time. We have a 4-hour session. You wake up downstairs in the darkness without any of your stuff. It's 8 o'clock. At midnight, something cataclysmic will happen. Go. I would call that a big formative moment for me as a player and a game master. That sense that there's going to be something around that corner, and it's probably going to be dangerous. And the only way to find out is to turn around the corner and face it anyways. And the only way for me to succeed is to take that risk. Is such an exciting style of play. So, to answer your question, John, I tell them to do it, I reward it, and I put ticking clocks in.
Excellent. I will try that out myself. So you've just created an adventure with Daniel. Give me a little bit of the top line of what it's about. And then My question is, like, how did you create it? How did you go about planning it and figuring out what it would be about and how it would progress? You know, what the epic finale might be of it. How did you go about kind of plotting it out?
Oh, sure. I'll do my best. And both of you have written so much more than me. But I'll share my process. The adventure is called The Wizard's Egg. So the podcast takes place in the district of Shadowhurst in the city of Pindus on Isles, which is, a pretty scummy neighborhood. And I'm really excited to release this adventure because it's going to open up, fans' views of what some of the other places in this city are. There is a wizard thief who has stolen something, and the adventurers, the contractors, are approached by a well-known fixer in their neighborhood and told to go get it. And the pay is really good, but they won't really tell them what it is. They're equipped with these devices, which are supposed to be clipped, these stolen mysterious artifacts that are going to destroy them. So whoever they were stolen from, their magical technology won't be taken. The big set piece of this is in a wizard's egg. And a wizard's egg is a laboratory. In this great city, it's really on this island. It's over full, so it's not like you can just build a lab out in the middle of the countryside where if something goes really bad, everybody's safe. No, so a wizard's egg is suspended high up in the air. It is a contiguous egg-shaped piece of stone that is resistant to divination magic, and if you blow the hell out of something in this egg, well, it can absorb it. So your job is to go into the ritziest district in the city in disguise. Low lifes like you are not welcome there, to find a way past the guards into this egg, maybe, through the utility systems, to locate these artifacts and to blow the hell out of them. You get to ride hippogriffs. I mean, it's a tier 1 adventure, but for a tier 1 adventure, there's some really cool set pieces, flying combat, perhaps, great opportunities to talk your way through the social upper crust of this city. And because it's Pindus, everybody has what they say they want and what they really want. And rarely are the two the same. So there's intrigue and there's action and there's flight. It's neat. Your follow-up question was, how the hell did I do it?
Indeed.
Let me see. I could show you the first take on it. It's so funny how much more detail needs to go into an adventure when you want somebody else to run it. I ran it for the first time because I had some friends who wanted to play in Pindus, and so I scribbled out half a dozen lines on a piece of paper and then made up a whole bunch on the fly and ran them a really cool session. And whenever I do that and the session is actually cool rather than meh, I put it aside. I was very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. Last year, about this time, when there was a guy trying to get a product off the ground called RPG Author, and he was looking for people to pay to write adventures in his online browser writing software. And I just released a blog post that was getting a lot of attention, and he really liked it. And so he approached me, and that's the one that I tapped. And I just started writing room descriptions, really. All the mechanics that I made up on the fly, trying to actually detail them into something that was level appropriate. And so by the end of that process, I had the bones of the adventure, written out. And it sat that way for a really long time. One thing about writing an adventure that is, in this multi-level interconnected laboratory with ventilation shafts in the middle of the air where aerial combat can happen all around it, is it's really hard to map two-dimensionally. Like, there's no piece of software where you can just say there's this room and there's this room and there's this room. There's so many levels. Three-dimensional space in it is so important. And so it sat on the back burner for a long time while I tried to find enough money. Oh, RPG Author folded, by the way. So the good news was the bad news was that I didn't get paid what he said that I'd get paid, though I got a little. The good news was that the adventure was mine. I wasn't writing it for them anymore. You gotta know who Phil Vecchione is?
Yes, Phil Vecchione, great dude.
He's my cousin.
Oh,
Well, kind of.
Oh.
I only know that because I picked up his Game Master book, Never Unprepared, which I really like. And in his foreword, he talks about being a Johnston in the family motto. And I have Johnson heritage with the same family motto. So I reached out to him a couple of times and claimed him as a cousin. And he's always been polite to me. We don't know each other very well. But he was just sending out advice one day. And he said, like, hey, everybody who's thinking about doing this thing, go and find a collaborator. It's too big. An adventure is way too big to muscle into publication by yourself. And yeah, maybe you're not going to take 100% of the profits when you sell the best-selling adventure of all time. But you just won't get it done without sharing it. And that there's so much satisfaction in finding people to work with, working on their stuff, working on your stuff. And that was the day that I wrote Daniel Hodges and I said, we're going to do this thing. Are you up for it? And he said, yes. And we've been back and forth since then. We wrote the copy first. He asked me tons of questions. He's a great prose writer. I think I'm stronger on the encounter design. So we complemented each other well. We got to a certain point where we were down to artwork. We were originally planning to do something for DM's Guild, so we had a huge library of artwork to access. And then that project, it was a seafaring adventure, just got way too big. So we flipped over into doing Pindus, which is its own setting and of course can't be done on DM's Guild, which was as a one-shot adventure. And we got it into shape really quickly, but we didn't have any artwork for it anymore and no budget for it. So I decided to learn how to do it myself. And it came out really well. I think the shortest answer that I can say to your how did I do it question is I had 6 weeks vacation from work in which I could basically work on it full time. Very, very lucky. I'm realizing as I'm blabbing all this to you, John and James, is that I didn't have a process because it's my first one and it's wild and it's exciting. And I built my website to actually sell the damn thing today. And I didn't even realize all the jobs that are involved in publishing a freaking adventure. It's huge. And thank God I followed Phil's voice and got Daniel on board because he has, with his Hazard Gaming imprint, published a few games of his own. This whole first time around has just been like slushing through it, trying to keep lists of all the stuff that's not undone and probably working on it in the wrong order and spending lots of time and fighting through. And then someday you have a thing. And that's probably how everybody has to do their first one. The next one, I'm going to have some more ideas and can tell you how I might structure my approach.
Cool. It sounds like you decided not to average yourself out in the your first adventure design.
It's true. It's true. I figured that I better at least write something that nobody else would.
All right. I have one more question here. It's a story you shared with me that I want you to share with Tabletop Babble listeners about. You went to a convention and you ran a game, and I don't believe you knew the players. And then this player versus player conflict came up, and how you handled it. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Let's hear that.
This might become published someday as well, but I wrote a convention one shot called Manure and Malice. That's also a Shadows of Pindus set adventure. And I ran it around to several conventions. I built a really cool set piece of artwork terrain for it. And in one of these conventions I walked, it was a cold and snowy day in November. And it was a very poorly attended convention because they had a huge group of people who were going to come up from Calgary, about 3 hours down the road, and the weather was awful. So I walked into this convention and it was almost empty. My game was full. I bummed around the convention for a little while, and then I went and I sat down at my table, and I knew as soon as my players began to arrive that this was going to just be a bit different. It wasn't going to be the same thing as sitting around with my friends who all know each other. And the reason I thought so one of the players sat down, was wearing a United Conservative Party t-shirt, which is our, right-leaning, like pretty religious party here in Alberta. And another player introduced themselves, telling us they preferred they, them pronouns, presented as male, and told us we want to use they, them pronouns. And there was the air kind of got a little thick. You could see everybody kind of eyeing each other around the table. I did my best to bring everybody into the world and go for it. And the game started off pretty well. To be concise, there came a moment where a very classic tabletop conflict came about. A rogue had stolen some things from a fairly friendly, bumbling non-player character, and the bard in the party didn't like that, was a good aligned bard, and wanted to return the stuff. And so they argued about it in character for a little bit, and then it came to, well, no, the bard was going to strip the backpack off of the rogue and return the stolen goods. And I called for, contest roles with each other. And the bard got it and went and returned it and discovered, that NPC told them, yeah, but you gave me this thing, but what about this other thing that got stolen from me? And the bard storms back down to where the rogue is and says, give that to me too. And in the midst of this conflict of them rolling off to each other to discover, a third player sort of pipes up and speaks to the bard player and tells him something along the lines of, hey, you know what? Like at my gaming table, we really try and use the yes and rule, and you're really blocking, this player of the rogue over here, which is, that's big, for a game master when players start telling each other they don't like the way each other are playing. Even when very politely put like that, that was just sending a clear message to me. It's like, okay, I'm missing something and it's time for me to step in. And I asked everybody, or I asked the player in question, like, do you feel blocked right now? And that player told me, yes. Okay, so they're suspected there's a problem. Somebody called it. There actually is a problem. Now what do we do? The Bard's player, of course, he gave us this old classic. It's what my character would do, which is a phrase that I think is often vilified, and for the reason that I think it can be used to protect like nasty kind of bullying behavior at the table. But I don't think it necessarily is always that. And so what I asked them to do was, I wanted them to step back from being their characters for a moment and talk to each other as co-writers, if you will, to reveal the minds of their characters, but from a third person perspective rather than playing that person. And we ran around the table and had everybody discuss, and everybody had really strong opinions about the conflict that was happening between the party bard and the party rogue, and spoke about how their character in the third person felt about it and perceived it and who they thought was right and what not. Everybody spoke about that. And the next question I said was, like, do you think that these choices amongst all these players, everything that their characters are thinking is consistent role play, perhaps even, interesting and nuanced role play? Like, do you think if you saw this on television, would you find it compelling? And the players who were really uncomfortable with the player conflict were hesitant, but everybody agreed that, yeah, like the dynamics, they seem real, they seem character embedded. And then the question that I asked after that was, are we having fun playing out that part of the story? And that's when everybody who was uncomfortable breathed a sigh of relief and said, no, like I'm just at a convention, like I just want to kick some asses and find some treasure. And the player who was playing the bard, who was legitimately like enjoyed player versus player conflict, from his table with the people he trusts. That's a big part of the game for him. As soon as he figured out that, oh, like this isn't a fun part of the game for everybody, he immediately like relaxed and went, oh my God, I'm sorry. Yeah, like let's go kill the rat thing. I gave them, just to cap off, I told the two players involved in the conflict, I said, you each get one sentence to say something snarky to each other, and then we're going to move on. And the rogue came up with like a really great snappy comeback. And the bard player, he just turned to one of the other characters and said, you know what? I trust you. You tell us where to go next. And they played out the rest of the game. They went from this situation. We went from playing to discomfort to having a really adult and open conversation amongst a bunch of people who didn't know each other at all to really, truly being able to enjoy the rest of the game. And if there's a reason I tell that story with pride, it's because I've done it wrong so many times. It's hard to do, but I share that story because we often encourage players to become immersed by speaking as their character. And when things get heated, I think there's a great deal of power in making explicit what the difference between the player and the character is, to kind of share the secret life and then find out what game we're all playing together.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's a great story. And it goes to show the power of like talking about it, right? At your table and asking questions and checking in to make sure everybody's feeling comfortable. It's just, that's great. Darren, this has been a great conversation and time has flown by here. I feel like I could talk to you for another 3 hours and it would feel like 3 minutes. Please come back. Please come back. I would really, really love that. But in the meantime, where can people find you on the internet?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on Twitter. It's at @dsteele. I got an E on the end of Steele, at @dsteelegm. You can also, I got the websites shadowsofpindus.com or Shadows of Pindus on Facebook. That adventure is for sale now on my website. It's going to be on sale for Drive-Thru RPG. Just as a first-time publisher, they'll finish verifying it someday soon. But yeah, it's a really terrific, thrilling one-shot adventure. And even if you don't want to run your players in an arcane punk world, it's a really great place to warp them to for a one-shot. It's good for convention. It's good for home play. So you can find that on my website at shadowsofpindus.com as well.
And John, where can people find you?
Well, folks can go to roleplayingtips.com. And I've actually just released a new book. It is the second edition of 5-Room Dungeons. It's a few hundred pages of example dungeons created by 5-Room Dungeons created by the community, as well as a whole bunch of dungeon creation ideas and advice from myself. And I'm giving it away free. So just go to my website and a link will pop up and you can get it from there.
Heck yeah, that sounds awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining me today on Tabletop Babble.
Yeah, thank you, James.
It's been an absolute pleasure.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Tabletop Babble. I just wanted to let you know, if you want to support the show financially, you should head on over to patreon.com/Introcaso. That's patreon.com/Introcaso, where you can support us for as little as $1 a month. You will get a survey where you get to determine the content of this podcast, and you get to determine the content of upcoming blog posts over at worldbuilderblog.com and exclusive content that's just going to be on the Patreon. These are articles that I write that are advice or maybe a creation like some new 5e monsters or magic items or something like that, plus a monthly Q&A. Those are at the higher donor levels. So go check it out at patreon.com/INTROCASO. Also, if you don't have the cash to support us financially, but you still want to do us a solid, head on over to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. If you do, I'll read it out loud. You can make me say anything you want, like Alpine Tam, who left a review entitled, "One of the best RPG podcasts, hands down." The review says, Tabletop Babble is simply one of the best design and industry-oriented TRPG podcasts out there. James's genuine enthusiasm is infectious, and his insights and experiences are worth paying attention to. Great guests, great positive attitude, and an overall great listen. I've met James briefly a couple of times, and it's a trip to hear that patented laugh in person after hearing it on so many episodes of TTB. My only question is, how does he find the time to do this on top of everything else he has to do in the world of tabletop gaming? Thank you so much, Alpine Tam. I really appreciate this. Kind words. I'm glad you like the laugh. I'm glad it isn't annoying or blows out your headphones or anything like that. So thank you. And here's how I do it all. My secret, just don't sleep, don't have a life. It's easy. People, if you are interested in Tabletop Babble, you should head on over to don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com, where you can find all kinds of awesome podcasts like Redemption. Redemption is a new podcast to DSPN that has joined our fold. They are a long-time running Star Wars actual play podcast, and we could not be more excited to have them on the network. So go check out Redemption. They're over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Listen to all their goodness. It is some awesome dramatic storytelling that it really gets me going when I hear it. I love the characters. It's so good. So go check it out over at don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com. Tabletop Babble is a show on Don't Split the Podcast Network. Thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Don't forget, RPGs are like sex. Hey people, I just wanted to take one more break to let you know that this podcast was brought to you by Elderwood Academy. Elderwood Academy is the maker of fine, handcrafted tabletop gaming products like a Codex Dice Tower. It is this beautiful, leather-wrapped, custom-made just the way you like it, wood and leather codex. It looks like, a secret codex, like the Da Vinci Code, but you use it to roll dice, and it is awesome and fun and super great. They have so many other handcrafted items like their scroll dice rolling trays, hex boxes, spellbook game boxes, dice, so much more. Go check them out at elderwoodacademy.com/don't split. That's elderwoodacademy.com/don't split.